Thank you. Please be seated. Prefect joke of the day. So I was driving down the street in my car, and I came to a traffic light. And now the traffic light was red. And I wanted it to be green. I wanted to go through because I was in a rush, right? So I looked right at that traffic light and I said, please change to green. And the traffic light spoke back to me and said, hey, don't look at me. I'm about to change. Thank you.
Really fantastic. Thank you, Isaac. Good morning, everybody. It's, as many of you know, yesterday was Earth Day. This is Earth Week. So we will, and so such a beautiful day and such a beautiful place to be during Earth Week. And you'll hear more about this during the week, but Sunday, I believe, is the annual cleanup that many of us will participate in. So more to come on that. But today, of course, is St. George Day. St. George was the patron saint of what country? Yes. England, thank you very much. Yes, he was the patron saint of England, and we're going to hear a bit about St. George today. We'll begin with, I know we just sang this hymn. We just sang the Duxbury hymn, but this is one of the most English of English hymns, composed by Ralph Vaughan Williams, who was a very eccentric Englishman who, among other things, turned down a knighthood several times, actually. Very interesting man. And a wonderful hymn. So let's start with hymn number 3, I Vow to Thee, My Country. Please stand. Thank you all. Please be seated. So I want to thank in advance Mr. Swanell for ensuring that we properly celebrated St. George, and I'm going to invite him up now to address us.
Good morning, everyone. My name, if you don't know me already, is Mr. Swanell. I am 46 and a half years old, and I'm out of my comfort zone. And that's not a bad thing. Last July, I moved to Vancouver Island with my wife and 2 children. I mention my age because before that move, I had spent my entire life within an hour of my birthplace in the northwest of England. Now that is well out of my comfort zone. Again, not a bad thing, and it's not been such a huge culture shock moving here. Shawnigan Lake, for example, despite its rich diversity of students and staff, is so very English in its traditions, and the climate here is similar to that in the UK. And I've even seen red telephone boxes. And I guess I should have known when we decided to move to British Columbia. Anyway, I'm speaking in chapel today because the 23rd of April is St George's Day. He is the patron saint of England, and St George's Day is our national day. A little bit about St George in a few minutes. It's an odd one, St George's Day, in England, because it isn't a national holiday, and I honestly believe that English people don't really know what to do on this day. The Canadians do, the Irish do, but we don't. And there's several reasons for this. A sense of, I guess, post-empire guilt, maybe, and recently the hijacking of our flag by far-right groups, which, given national days are for flag flying as much as anything else, people are less inclined to do so because of this. Or maybe it is that the legend of St George is dated. Reading the news this morning, the pockets of celebrations are going ahead in small communities, but I think the only time we English really get together as communities and celebrate England is during the World Cup football. Generally, though, I think we are quite a divided and very regional nation. North versus south, London versus the rest of the country versus London, Lancashire versus Yorkshire, Red Rose versus the White Rose. And I'm currently wearing my Red Rose pin. On my first day on duty in Lonsdale's house, I met Austin Chilton from Whitby in North Yorkshire, who in the 15th century would have been my sworn enemy. But in 2018, because he's northern, he's all right. And it was during the War of the Roses in the 15th century that the last English monarch was killed in battle. Richard of York gave battle in vain, and in doing so enabled generations of school children to remember the colours of the rainbow. It's a mnemonic. Richard of York gave battle in vain. It reads out the colours of the rainbow. So I was born in Manchester, home of the Industrial Revolution, football, music, and Coronation Street, where you could cut the city in two, blue and red. Iconic Manchester bands, the Smiths, Joy Division, the Stone Roses, Oasis, and The Fall, as well as two world-class orchestras. Football and music have shaped me as a person, and Manchester has played a huge part in this. And for that reason, I feel Manchester is the best city in England. But it is all about our regional roots, and had I been born somewhere else, I would be speaking about another city with equal enthusiasm. This national identity comes in many forms, none more so than bread rolls. Everyone knows what a bread roll is? Yeah? Well, in England, there are 15 different words for a bread roll. There's 5 generic terms. There's roll, finger roll, dinner roll, bulky roll, and a Kaiser roll, which kind of follow a common theme. There's also 10 regional words: bun, cob, barm cake, tea cake, muffin, oven bottom, nudger, stotty cake, batch, and bin lid. This can be problematic, but it also gives people an inkling of where you are from. Go into Manchester and ask for a cob, and they'll say, "So you're not from round here, love?" Ask for a tea cake in Manchester and expect your bacon butty bread roll to contain raisins, and then be told to get back to Blackburn. If you're in Manchester, it's a barm cake, mate. So, back to St. George, famous for the legend of George and the Dragon. Now, I was going to read it myself. However, my monotonic delivery that works so well when reading bedtime stories to my children is not going to cut the mustard at the start of a school day. So I'm going to invite up Austin to retell the tale. Spoiler alert, the dragon's fate is not a good one, and apologies to the prep house in advance.
Once upon a time, 1,700 years ago, during the Roman Empire, there was, just outside the city of Cyrene in North Africa, a large stagnant pond. In this pond there lived a dragon. Whenever the dragon breathed on a person or an animal, they died on the spot. At first the dragon breathed on all the sheep that lived in the fields around the city. Then he started to attack the people and threatened to kill them, one and all. The people of Cyrene had no choice but to come to terms with the dragon. They agreed to give him one person every month, so long as he left the others alone and unharmed for the rest of time. The king decreed that the names of every citizen should be scratched onto pieces of pottery and kept in a great urn. Each month, one of the names would be drawn out of the urn, and that person would be given to the dragon. In this way, men and women, both rich and poor, were chosen to be fed to the evil beast. Then one day, the name of the princess was taken out of the urn. According to the king's own law, his daughter must be sacrificed. He called the people together and offered them gold and treasure if only they would agree to spare her from the dragon. The judges who oversaw the lottery said that it must be completely fair, or else the people would no longer accept it, and so the king solemnly agreed. A week went past, and the day arrived when she was to meet her fate. The palace servants dressed her in a wedding gown and placed a crown of flowers on her head. They led her out of the city in a procession and headed for the lake where the dragon lived. As they were on their way, a Roman soldier came riding up to the city. His name was George, and he was a Christian from Cappadocia in Turkey. George stopped and asked why the princess was looking so sad on her wedding day. A citizen replied, "Because according to the law, she must this day marry the dragon who lives in that lake, and her wedding gift shall be death." George immediately replied, "If that really be the case, then let me slay the dragon." The citizens warned him that nobody stood a chance fighting against such a ferocious, plague-breathing lizard, but George was determined to save the princess. The people tied her to a tree by the lake and left her to meet her fate. George saw the dragon emerge out of the swampy waters, and he charged upon his horse and flung his spear into its shoulder. The dragon let out a piercing shriek. It was wounded, but not fatally. While it was writhing in pain, George managed to cut the princess free from her bonds. The dragon was enraged and rounded on its attacker. George retreated and called out to the princess to take off the belt from around her waist and throw it at the dragon. This she did, and by a miracle, the belt wrapped itself around the dragon's neck like a collar. Immediately, the dragon became as peaceful as a lamb, and the princess was able to lead it back by her belt to the city. When the people saw the princess and George leading the dragon back into their walls, they became angry and afraid. George then slayed the dragon, but not before having the king agree to all the townspeople being baptized.
Thank you, Austin. In years later, the Roman emperor of the time had ordered the persecution of Christians, but George refused to give up on his faith and make a sacrifice to pagan gods. George was then imprisoned, tortured, and ultimately beheaded. Soon after his death, George was venerated as a saint with a feast day on the 23rd of April, the supposed day of his martyrdom. Such is his association with honour and bravery. He is also the patron saint of many other countries, including Russia, Portugal, Serbia, and Montenegro. One country is even named after him, and that's Georgia, which used to be part of the old Soviet Union and is the birthplace of Joseph Stalin. The Red Cross of St. George is on the national flag of England and Georgia. In Canada, St. George's Day is a provincial day in Newfoundland and Labrador. But what to do on St. George's Day? Well, according to visitengland.com, and again, apologies to Prep House, we can boo the dragon at Rest Park in Buckinghamshire. We can pull on a petticoat in Bath, come face to face with Komodo dragons at Colchester Zoo, stay at the George Hotel in Kent, or learn the act of dragon slaying in Cheshire. You may be surprised to hear I have not done any of that, and what petticoats in Bath have to do with all of this, I do not know. Or we could do what we did at the start of chapel and sing a British or English hymn, such as Jerusalem. This is our unofficial English anthem, written by poet William Blake around 1800. Jerusalem is actually the preface to a much larger work called Milton, a Poem. It wasn't until Hubert Parry set it to music and was orchestrated by that most English of composers, Edward Elgar, that it became well known. William Blake was a social reformer and an ardent supporter of the French Revolution, which toppled the monarchy. He despised the tyranny of British rule and the horrors of industrialisation that was knocking on English doors. His poem revisits an urban legend of a young Jesus walking on England's shores during his lost years, and alluding to those dark satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution, Blake creates a new Jerusalem that represents the perfect country with no discord, equality, hope, and of course a green and pleasant land. The hymn Jerusalem was chosen by Mrs. Dalrymple as the Kay's house hymn, where she was house director for 20 years. She also first sung this hymn as a child growing up in the north of England. And for her, it is not only England, but also the message of hope and of never giving up that makes the hymn so special. For me, I think of the poem each time I fly into Manchester and see from overhead the patchwork quilt of fields and those mills of the Industrial Revolution, and I feel a great sense of pride in where I am from. In a minute, we're going to be singing Jerusalem, but the Rev is just going to have a couple of words before that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Swanell, and thank you, Austin, for that. And I just want to interpose myself here for a couple of minutes. Because, you know, this chapel is a chapel that was founded on the Church of England practices and beliefs and faiths. And for many years, it was a very much a Church of England, an Anglican chapel. But of course, things change over time. But I thought I would just say a couple of things, because there are kind of echoes of that in the chapel. On Saturday morning, we begin with words from the Book of Common Prayer. Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. O God, make speed to save us. O Lord, make haste to help us. And those are words from this little book, the Book of Common Prayer, which was written in 1459 originally by Thomas Cranmer, who was Archbishop of Canterbury. And this little book is actually one of the foundational books in the English language. It was originally written decades before Shakespeare kind of got his groove, half a century before the King James Bible. So it's considered to be one of the most important pieces of ancient English literature that exists. So part of our kind of devotion to Anglicanism is also devotion to this kind of tradition and this kind of depth of spiritual and literary richness that we share together. Things change, as I say. One of the things that seems to have happened is that we don't seem to be using the formula around readings anymore, and Mr. CB and I have had extensive discussions about this. We've decided we just will let that go for now. As I say, sometimes the population itself kind of determines these things. Just so we're not awkward, some people say the responses, some people don't. If you feel they're meaningful, you can just kind of say them to yourself. But for the meantime, we'll kind of just make things simple. So as I say, we have this kind of underlying ancient 100-year-old connection with Anglicanism, but if we share a common religion in this chapel, of course, it's a religion of mutual affection, mutual respect, generosity, and gratitude. And that's what brings us together. And we find that those virtues and those values in so many places and in so many traditions. But today, as I say, we're celebrating the Englishness that is so much a part of the fabric of who we are. So then let's, without further ado, sing that most English of all English hymns, Jerusalem, which is hymn number 5. Please stand.